My objection is that it's outside the scope of the evidence to argue that my client was a homosexual or that his sexual orientation was in any way a motive for this crime. I understand the argument, the construction that Mrs. Bozanich put on it was that it was to keep that deep and dark secret that the parents were killed. I mean, we are talking speculation on a very high level here, rather on a very low level here.
And the people's response.
I intend to argue that, as Eric Menendez testified, that he felt that he had a problem with his sexuality, that his mother, who he had testified himself, had listened to his phone conversations for about a year, going back to the fall of 1988 until the time that he murdered her, confronted him, asked him whether or not he was gay, asked him to get a girlfriend. He testified that he had questions about whether or not he was gay. He, in fact, put on evidence that on November 30th, 1989, he bought bumper pads for his bed when, in fact, he had testified before the jury that the only reason why he had problems with his bed is because his father made him kneel on his bed in sexual activity, yet 3 months after his father, he has murdered his father, he is buying bumper pads for that very purpose. His father disinherited him, or threatened to disinherit him. In the 1211 tape, the defendant refers to relationships he had with other people, as he wished he could have told his mother about. And his father, according to him, said he was gay.
No, he called him faggot, which is different.
Okay, well, why do you have to get so emotional about it? Well, just calm down, because your arguments really are more persuasive if you can be rational about it rather than just yelling and screaming.
It offends me that a molested child is being blamed this way for the perversion of his molester, number one. Number two, it prohibits me from proving what Mr. Kuriyama knows, that the person who shared that bed with the bumpers was a beautiful young woman named Noelle Terlesky. And if this indeed was ever even a cognizable issue in this trial, I would have been more than happy to put Eric Menendez's beautiful girlfriends on the witness stand to explain his sexuality. But it was such a red herring with respect to a provable issue that had any relevance to this case from the very beginning. It was simply a matter of Mr. Kuriyama wanting to prejudice the jury against my client. And now for him to be able to get up and take totally neutral information from the record and argue this prejudicial theory, I think, is absolutely wrong, unfair, denies my client the right to confront evidence, denies him the right to put on a defense, to argue these ludicrous speculative theories that his mother confronted him, of which there is no evidence, because she was listening in on his phone calls, no doubt with his homosexual lovers, of which there is not a shred
Bear in
of
mind,
evidence.
there is no jury here. I could hear you and understand you without
I
all the
understand.
emotionality. It really
well,
would work
I'm
better
sorry,
that
Judge,
way.
you know I am emotional, and I know you don't like it, but that's the way I am.
It's just not productive. It doesn't help.
Well,
it's counterproductive.
if it
Just
hurts,
calm down.
if it hurts, it shouldn't.
Well, it should be a situation where you can argue rationally and unemotionally.
You know, if I may.
Yeah, I'm not finished, Mr. Kuriyama. The notion that to string together this nonsense and argue that that justifies arguing that somehow Eric was homosexual and this was a motive for the homicides.
He was on direct examination. They tried to make the father look like he was a molester. And counsel knows quite well that I have attempted to bring in witnesses who would testify as to Mr. Eric Menendez's homosexuality. So
Okay, the defense is objecting that the prosecution should not be permitted to argue whatever inferences they want to draw from the evidence that is now before the jury.
What are they going to argue? Was he a homosexual at 6? Did he make Daddy do it? Is it all his fault? If they want to argue that, fine. But I think it's a different kind of argument. I think it's an argument that he is solely designed to inflame the jury against Eric Menendez on the notion that Eric Menendez was homosexual and that this was the deep, dark secret of this family, that and in order to keep this secret, he killed his parents and then proceeded to go off to Tahoe and meet his girlfriend, who proceeded to live with him for the next 6 months. And if indeed I mean, that is the notion of arguing within the scope of the evidence. I suppose then I am free to argue all about his girlfriends, you know, on the thinnest of possible evidence in this case.
I intend to only argue on the evidence that has been presented. Counsel knows that these men that came forward are not figments of my imagination, and I resent.
Well, I object to the statement that
excuse me,
came
it's
forward.
my
That's a
turn.
petty trial.
Counsel, let one side finish.
I resent counsel trying to mislead here and claim that the prosecution is homophobic. That is not true. This defendant testified as to his sexuality himself. He injected that into this case. So it's something that we certainly would not have raised, except for the defendant having raised that.